Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am really honored to be joined by my good friend Tom at One Door. And for those of you who don't know what One Door does, it's really kind of, I would say, the gravy for this holiday season, which is going to be a really interesting one and has already started. As you know, we've just finished our 10/10 shopping festival with lots of learnings. And I think this idea around kind of what's happening in the store and being able to understand that at a different level before we all get started is challenging. And the level with which we're seeing consumers on the expectation side, what's happening in store is higher than it's ever been. And then Tom, as you know, we are seeing higher traffic year on year if we compare back to 2019, which I think is above everybody's level of expectations. So I would say your phone has to be ringing off the hook.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of demand. Our enterprise, our pipeline has significantly increased here in terms of opportunities and demand for our capabilities, our solution, our technology and platform over the last 6 months. It's a hot area, no question.
Yeah, I mean, and it's challenging, right? Because we have so many, we always think everything is unique, but every single holiday season we're challenged with different, kind of aspects. And this year, right, whether it's, kind of a lot of, right, we had merchandise sitting in containers and factories, and it's all kind of entered the system at the same. So I was like, it's truly seasonless. And that's what everybody wanted. We've got spring, summer, winter, fall, all in stores right now. And I think that, that has really changed, right? The role of, merchandising in an organization, and we could go through like a million other things, whether it's, kind of now they're selling previous level merchandise on their own websites, right? Returns. So all these things where really merchandise is at the middle. What does that kind of tell you in terms of how whether it's just the merchandising organization, how has their role changed inside and maybe even outside the organizations?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is maybe to just think you were talking about seasonality. I also just talk about sort of overall trends as it relates to year on year. But the role of the merchandiser here as we emerge from the pandemic, there's a ton of pressure on these teams right now. I think during the pandemic, it was all about and not just the pandemic, but then also as we sort of emerged quasi post-pandemic with the supply chain challenges that we saw as we came back to normal, that the merchandising challenge was, look, if we can find inventory somewhere, if you can find it, get it, just put it on the floor and it will sell through. There really wasn't a lot of focus on the curation or the quality of the in-store, the physical in-store experience, sort of where products are, how they're laid out, et cetera. Now, as we kind of quote, return back to normal, albeit like you said, with just a tremendous amount of demand and foot traffic in stores, all of a sudden the pendulum is completely shifted and these teams are now being tasked with, hey, you need to deliver a super high quality experience for our customers, and you need to get back to sort of curating great collections, et cetera. And now, as you described, but you're doing it in an environment where there's a ton more e-commerce noise in the system in terms of returns in stores, store orders need to be fulfilled, et cetera. So it's certainly challenging time to be a merchandiser, but also an exciting one because there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of new tools, there's a lot of new capabilities. So it's a great time.
Tom, you hit on one of the survey questions that, we had focused on, which was the survey data reveals that, retail and merchandising decision makers are very positive, and I think they always are. I think it's the nature of the job, about, the performance of their merchandising teams within the organization and just, I think, their outlook in general. However, we know, and our survey also said this, that the challenges not only are persistent, but like rampant. And weird. I mean, I feel like at least I've had this conversation in my head for years. What is the discrepancy there? And why?
It's interesting. It's you always wonder whether it's sort of the lake, we used to call the Lake Wobegon problem, which is like the public radio thing where all the children, it's like, well, my employees are all above average, but I think there's more to it than that, right? I think that I bet you if you ask them about the systems, the underlying systems and processes that their teams work with every day, that you might get to the root cause of some of the challenges that they face. I think they feel that their teams are doing a great job and they're sort of doing yeoman's work and hero work to kind of keep things running and keep things happening on time. But the fact is that the underlying systems and silos that have been built up over sort of years of investments in legacy technologies create an environment where it's unbelievably challenging for even the best teams to deliver, to manage in today's environment, again, based on sort of two key factors. One is that supply chain disruptions are more frequent, therefore the systems and the processes have to be much more kind of resilient and less brittle. And then the second is just that we continue to face labor shortages in stores. And so a lot of the merchandising expertise that used to exist in the field can no longer be counted on to kind of cover up some of the supply chain disruptions and challenges in terms of decision making at the edge of the network or sort of at the shelf. A lot of that decision making power doesn't exist anymore because it no longer works in the store.
It's interesting because, once again, as we're thinking about this holiday season, there's so much that's changing because of technology, right? The way that, sales associates can interact with consumers and around hyper personalization and whatnot. But, what is interesting, I think, going back to our survey, is that I think it was, 70% of decision makers are either very or significantly challenged in effectively leveraging advanced technologies on the merchandising side. So what do you think, so as I start to think about, the whole store, if you will, and especially that with which, can be the greatest challenge around, quantity, quality, et cetera, the merchandise, what do you think could be the primary reason behind this? And what can we do as, the retail industry to fix it?
Yeah. So I think your question is sort of how do we do a better job of enabling retailers to take advantage of next generation technologies? I think one of the things that we've always focused on, and I think it's an important thing for all the technology vendors that we partner with and that we work with, is that very often, we need to understand the merchandising systems within legacy retailers, within large scale retailers. These systems are essentially mission critical sort of brains within these organizations. Ripping and replacing these systems in the interest of implementing next generation technology is virtually impossible because the disruption associated with those types of transformations is very difficult to pull off. So one thing that we've focused on and delivered on with our platform over time is we take a much more wrap and renew approach to implementation and working with partners and working with customers. What we're trying to do is we're trying to provide them with the ability to upgrade their technology and take advantage of next generation capabilities, but doing it in a way that doesn't require them to rip and replace, sort of mission critical merchandising systems. It's been a big part of our mission here, especially as in the way that we work with large retailers, like large grocers in the U.S. and abroad. I think it's a critical thing, and technologies like sort of next generation API capabilities that are becoming more standardized, sort of getting down into the tech weeds, but all of those types of capabilities are critical to helping retailers adopt new technologies and new capabilities without, risking sort of massive outages or massive downtime because of trying to make sort of large scale transformations.
It's interesting because, it does often seem that there is a gap between what's planned and then what's implemented.
Yeah.
And I find, I find it doesn't matter if there's a few stores or a lot of stores. And, then the execution of the merchandising plans can also be challenged why do you think this occurs? And is there any impact in terms of like number of stores?
Yeah, there's a big we definitely see this in the sense that we serve all different types of customers, from specialty retailers with a couple hundred locations to the largest grocers with thousands of, sort of superstore formats. The larger the footprint generally, and this is just generally speaking, but as you get larger, the ownership for sort of the planning and the execution becomes very distinct and diverse, and there's a big gap, right? So in a large scale organization, the merchandising team at HQ is responsible for sort of the category management, assortment, range decisions, and then field operations, store operations is responsible for the in-store execution. And there really has classically not been, frankly, a ton of collaboration between those two organizations. So the planners, essentially they make a plan, they sort of, don't say this pejoratively, but in some cases sort of throw the plan over the wall to store ops, and then just sort of store ops to deal with it. What we're really beginning to see now, which is a great step, is that merchandising organizations at HQ are now being more held accountable for the quality of the execution in store and working much more in partnership with store operations. So for example, in our discovery process, when we're working with a new client, generally in either the first or the second meeting we have with them, the merchandising team's pulling somebody from store operations into the meeting, because it's critical that these teams begin to work more collaboratively on closing that execution gap between the planning at HQ and the execution in store.
One thing you said that, I want to go back to is on grocery, because if you think about, you're dealing with something that's highly perishable. And so if there is this disconnect, your waste is higher than it needs to be. And, our data suggests that 40% of all food grown ends up in landfills. Many cases, because of exactly what we're talking about. Can you help us think specifically about the grocery industry and, what needs to change there and how quickly can that be done?
Yeah, well, groceries, they're off to a great, I sort of say, I think they're off to a great start. Again, we're working with a lot of grocers today, and it's really cool to see our platform delivering incredible business value for, large grocery retailers where they're just seeing huge efficiency gains. I think that the next step here is we just need to continue to bridge the gap between planning and execution that we're already doing. And then the next step is also, if you think about why grocery is so complex, it's because at any given time in a grocery store, a number of the people in the store executing merchandising actually don't work for the grocer. They work for third-party distributors, they work for brands, et cetera. And so the next step in the evolution is, in addition to bridging the gap within the retailer, it's really beginning to bridge the gap between the retailers, the third-party distributors, and the brands, so that everybody working in that store understands what's happening. And that's actually one of the reasons we're so psyched about the partnership that we announced a couple of weeks ago with Movista, which is a task management provider, a retail execution provider. Our vision there is exactly that, right? Which is we, collaborate to bring brands and retailers closer together in the ways that they collaborate around what's happening in any given location at any given time.
You hit on a nerve, actually, because I was talking to one of the companies that does DSD, right, direct store delivery, and they were saying, timing is everything, and they were just talking about how challenging it is to communicate right at the store level, and that they felt that there was a much better way, not only in terms of communicating just about the product itself, but then about different kind of promotions. And so I think that this is, you've always, Tom, been a step ahead of everyone. I think this is such a great example, because I know this is a pain point, but not one that's even often talked about. So I think that's great. Right? I'm going to ask two more questions and we'll wrap it up. But, how do you see, either, kind of through a one-door lens, what are companies doing different this holiday season that should impact their top and bottom line?
as if you appreciate, sort of from our perspective as a technology provider, seasonal trends aren't something that we're looking more big picture, sort of what are the broad things that are happening over time. Again, I would just say that overall, I'm really encouraged with the ways in which retailers are beginning to kind of break down the operating silos as it relates to the way that they do their merchandising. And that will ultimately drive big impacts. So the top line impact is, very simply that you start reducing out of stocks, you start reducing phantom out of stocks. Basically, when customers find what they want, they buy more. That's just simple. And then the other big part of this is that as you do a better job of bridging this gap between HQ and stores and do a better job communicating with store teams, you can massively impact the cost of labor associated with performing this work in a store. In some cases, you can, just by doing a better job of communicating how you want something done, you can shave 25% of the time you spend on it off of the work that these teams are doing. And that's great, because you can then either book the labor savings, or you can importantly have them spend more time doing, really high quality work, which is things like managing customers and helping sell things with customers. So there's a great opportunity there, both from a top and bottom line perspective, as far as what we're seeing technologically.
I remember years ago, Home Depot talked about this whole like tasking to selling, right? Because let's get out of kind of the task. And ultimately, right, people who work in stores want to be able to have time to spend with customers. And so like the ROI is realized very quickly. I think it's actually a very important point. So which leads to my last question. If you could kind of like almost define like the state of nirvana, right? What's the right? What's the optimal state here? Because I mean, this is actually how I got involved in retail tech, was talking about these topics. And I was like, really? This doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And that was well over a decade ago. So why are we still having those conversations? And what is it, Tom? Like you're such a great thought leader. What needs to take place in this industry to move us into kind of that much higher state where we can think about, more the customer experience and the experience of, kind of the sales associates, as opposed to, being so involved in like checking all these boxes?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, again, as somebody that's spent a lot of time in the enterprise software space and solving sort of large, hairy problems for big organizations, everybody always looks at themselves and thinks, oh my God, we're so backward in our little part of the world. When you sort of look under the covers of most enterprises, you'd be just amazed at how how a lot of their processes continue to be extremely manual, sort of lots of handoffs, lots of sort of swivel chair from system to system. And that's just the nature of the way that these systems get built over time. And it takes a lot to transform them. I think in terms of where we see sort of what nirvana is for us, I think ultimately nirvana for us is imagine just a continuous loop that's sort of always on and always working in real time, where somebody at HQ is making changes quickly, pushing those changes out into the field. The field teams understand what's happening. They're making the changes. And then the performance of those changes is being measured in a way that it can be quickly sort of adapted into, and in some cases, even automatically drive through the use of adaptive analytics, changes to the merchandising for whatever that next rev is. And also really moving away from this idea of seasonal resets to a much more continuous kind of incremental change, where resets are happening all the time, and where, that there's just sort of no longer this kind of big, massive seasonal thing. I think for us, that's nirvana. When we work with customers, honestly, the first step is getting the data into a place where it can be sort of easily accessed across the organization. And then the next step is process change and process automation. And then the third step after that is introducing kind of AI and introducing sort of better decision making. But most of the customers we work with are still sort of somewhere in that second step today. But I'm really encouraged. And the other thing I would say is, having worked in a number of different verticals, the retail vertical is unique in its hunger for solutions. You go to a trade show in retail and everybody's looking around for solutions, whereas you go to trade shows and some other verticals and everybody walks around like they have all the answers. I think retail is amazing and unique and incredibly exciting because of the sort of the desire on behalf of customers to get it right and to change and to do things better.
Well, I think customers can also hold you accountable in retail in a way that they don't necessarily in other industries.
That's
I
for
mean, which is
sure.
what which is what I've always loved, right? You're on an analyst call, right? They say they're doing A, B, and C. You go in the store, you're like, I don't see that. And
Yeah.
so, but I also think, and there's something that you talked about that I want to make sure we just kind of tease out at the very end here. So much of what you're doing at One Door, right? There's a very important kind of sustainable element here. And I think it is, right, as we start to think about, changes in reporting requirements for 2023, I do think that, Tom, there is a very significant underlying kind of challenge that you're helping us all solve around the, kind of longevity of inventory, how to think about kind of, right, first in, first out, all these challenges that many retailers have. And I think as, climate tech is taking hold in a whole new way, I
Yeah.
really do think you're going to be a part of that conversation going forward. And I want to thank you from the industry because it's really critical right now. We need to help retailers however we can. So thank you for joining us. I always learn from you. This is really great. Thanks.
Me
Enjoy the
too.
rest of the
Always
day.
learn from you. So that's great.
Take care. Talk to you soon.
All right. We'll talk to you guys later. See you around.